Good morning. Welcome to the garden. I'm glad you're here with us this morning. Once again, as I've mentioned almost every week since Lent has begun, our topics are coming from the book by Tom Stella that's entitled Finding God Beyond Religion. And this topic is about faith versus belief, and if there is a difference between them. And it's something we've talked about here in the past over the last couple of years numerous times. But it's worth diving into in a little more detail maybe today. Now, Tom Stella introduces this particular chapter on faith and belief with this story. He says, "As I reflect on my life, it is clear to me that like a biker riding downhill, I coasted comfortably for years, believing the teachings of my faith tradition without question and obeying its rules without protest." And then he goes on to say that he felt pretty good about himself when he was doing all that. He felt virtuous, that he was doing what he was supposed to be doing and obeying all that. And he felt that he won the approval of his peers and his elders. But then something started happening and changing within him, and he became a little restless, and he became a little more confused, and he realized that he wasn't really growing spiritually at all. Well, I wonder if any of us here can identify with that. I certainly know I can. I've shared with you before a little bit of my faith journey. I've been a part of the church my entire life. And frankly, for a long time, I thought everything the church said, hook, line, and sinker, without questioning. And as I look back on that now, I realize that I was sort of short-circuiting the faith process, I guess. It was sort of like I was in the God box, or the church box, if you will, thinking that if I could do everything the church said and believe everything the church claimed, then I qualified, and I was doing what was right. I was a person of faith. And then I now realize that, at least for me, that wasn't necessarily true. It wasn't an end-all in and of itself just to be a church person. It didn't necessarily equate to being a faith person. Now, I don't know why I bought into that the way I did. It may have just been who I was. It may have been that, like many of us, I guess I wanted to fit in and belong somewhere. Maybe it was the sense that this was the way to connect with God, and I really wanted that kind of connection, but not realizing that there are all kinds of ways in which we can connect with God. So, is there a difference between faith and belief? Now, in the past, we've talked about the work of Diana Butler Bass and of Harvey Cox and some others who say that there is definitely a distinction between the two of them, and Tom Stella agrees with that. And he really makes it a little simpler, I think. When he talks about belief, he said it's a function of the mind. It's our thoughts. It's what we hold to be true, what we think is true. Where when he's talking about faith, it's a matter of the heart. It's really about trust. Now, I think I've shared with you before, one of the definitions, I guess you could call it, of faith is that we lean our whole weight on someone or something. In other words, we kind of give ourselves over to God. That's what faith is really all about. It's not about head stuff, it's about heart stuff, and being willing to trust there. The Bible passage we have for this morning gives its own definition of faith. Now, this is from Hebrews. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows exactly why Hebrews was written. This particular piece was believed to be directed to Jewish Christians at the very end of the 1st century A.D. And this is how it reads. The fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. You see, what I think is being said here is that faith is about hope and confidence and trust, if you will. And it's getting a grasp on the fact that the things we can see and touch and feel are really pointing to something more, pointing to something that's really invisible, if you will. I've always liked that quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "All I have seen teaches me to trust the Creator for all I have not seen." Well, faith is what gives us the courage to live life the way we're supposed to live it, fully and completely. It overcomes our fears and allows us to live more boldly. And it helps us to be willing to move, not to stay stuck, not to stay still, but to move forward, even not knowing what's there. Martin Luther King said, faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Well, there's an old story that's one of the best ones I know when it comes to trying to talk about what faith is. I've shared it with you before. I'm sure you've heard it before, but bear with me because you're going to hear it again. It's a story about a tightrope walker who stretched tightrope between the top of two tall buildings in the downtown area of a city. And he began walking back and forth across that tightrope. And of course, a crowd gathered down below watching him. And after the crowd got there and applauded when he got all the way across, he looked down at them and he said, "Do you believe that I can walk across this tightrope blindfolded?" And they yelled, yeah, we believe you can do that. So he put the blindfold on, and very slowly and carefully he walked across that tightrope from one building to the other. And they cheered madly, wildly when he got to the other side. And then he looked down at them and said, "Do you have faith that I could walk across this tightrope blindfolded, pushing a wheelbarrow?" Some of them shook their heads, and yet there was one guy who was really confident that he could do it. And he said, "Yeah, you can do it. Go for it. I know you can do it." He said, "You really trust? You really think that I can do that?" He said, "Yeah, you can do it." And he said, "Okay, come up here. Get in the wheelbarrow." See, that's what faith is. It's putting our money where our mouth is. It's not just talking the talk. It's living the life. It's getting in the wheelbarrow. You see, faith is the kind of thing that changes us when we experience that trust in God. It means that we have the sense that we don't have to be in charge of everything and in control, maybe because we realize we aren't in control of anything, and maybe because we just simply trust enough that we don't have to take charge of everything and to try to orchestrate everything. An unknown writer said this: "As your faith is strengthened, you will find that there is no longer the need to have a sense of control, that things will flow as they will, and that you will flow with them to your great delight and benefit." Well, within the church, it seems to me at least that what has been stressed as most important is a set of beliefs. That if you believe this, you really, then you qualify, then you really are a Christian. And one of the ways in which that importance has been emphasized is by trying to still instill the fear of God in people for our eternal souls. And it to some degree it's worked quite well. We talked last week about the church and how it really is not terribly welcoming to our questions, and especially to our doubts. If we are people who express any kind of doubts, then we are seen to be weak people, not people of faith. And the more I've thought about that, the less I believe that's true. I think doubts may be a part of our faith. In fact, that's what the theologian Paul Tillich said. He said, "Doubt is not the opposite of faith. It is one element of faith. It's okay to doubt." Well, Tom Stella talks about when things started to change in his own life, when some of the things he had always thought he needed to believe began to lose their meaning for him. And he began to discard some of the things that didn't really work for him, weren't relevant for him anymore. And he said he felt as though he'd been cast afloat, that he was out there all by himself trying to deal with all of that. And it was a time of confusion and difficulty for him. But then he said he finally realized that it was really the seed of his faith beginning to grow and emerge in him. And he realized that he could still live with faith, even if he no longer believed the things that he had been taught in the past. Now, interestingly enough, I just read an article this week that came from the conservative side of United Methodism. And as I read through what it was saying, I was really struck by the rigidity of belief that it was insistent that we had to buy it this way, that there were no challenges. And in fact, folks like me would be really condemned by this branch, saying that we're not being faithful, we're not living the way we need to live. And that it's always bothered me, this insistence on this is the way it is and this is the only way it is. I just can't quite believe that's the way it works. I can wind up being dead wrong about this whole thing, but where I come down is, I guess I think God understands me probably better than I understand myself, and ultimately when it's all said and done, it's between me and God. And so I guess that's where I have to be. I just can't be there where this is, the only way to go, the only way to live, the only way to believe. Now, one of the things Stella talks about, he kind of phrases this out, the problem he has with organized religion, if you want to put it that way, is what he calls the problem with more unquestioned answers than unanswered questions. Unquestioned answers as opposed to unanswered questions. Now, I really like that whole thing, the fact that there are just things we don't know. And so why do we always try to give pat answers to things? After all, we're human beings. We have only limited knowledge and limited abilities. And so, part of what I think where we have to come down is that there's just a lot of ambiguity, a lot of things that we can't know, maybe a lot of confusion there, and maybe it's okay. Maybe that's an okay place to be. And if we trust God, it can be an okay place to be. But, it really doesn't come down to what we say or what we think or what we feel in terms of this. It comes down to how we live our lives. Now, Jesus said that we are to live a life of love and embrace that love, God's love, and to love God, to love one another, and to love ourselves. That's the greatest commandment. Phil Gully has a book entitled The Evolution of Faith, in which he talks about people like that, people who embody God's love as being what he calls Godbearers, that they carry this love with them. And he describes them this way: those who bear the divine presence will not have to point it out to the rest of us. We will see it in their conduct, in their humility, in their grace to others, in their compassion for the hurting, in their truth-telling that helps us grow, in their challenge to evil, in their courage in the face of abusive power, and in their yearning for justice. It's a tall order, but I believe if we let God's love into us and if we trust God, we can become God-bearers ourselves. And you see, what happens is that we change, and the concern for ourselves and self-interest lessen in us. And we began to be more concerned about our brothers and sisters and about their well-being. And as a result, we become kinder, gentler, more caring, more loving people. To me, that's the mark of true faith.